the biggest thing was learning how to feel and visualize joy. Sometimes that was joy of past experiences and reliving them in detail in my mind verbally and feeling that joy again, and then taking that joy into the future and visualizing things that I wanted to happen to be able to do, whether large or small. And I just had miraculous experiences of those things materializing in my life. But it got to the point where it wasn't important if they materialized or not, because I learned how to summon joy. Like, I could do all the things, go to a place where I could weep with joy, whether the thing was happening or going to happen or not. And that was, as we know now, that flooded me with the chemicals that were needed to
Yes.
rewire and counteract all the adrenaline and cortisol that had been coursing through me for all those years.
Welcome to the Story Behind the Symptoms. Your host is David Clark, MD, a board-certified gastroenterologist who successfully diagnosed and treated over 7,000 patients with neuroplastic pain or illness. We'll dive into our guests' life experiences to uncover the deeper causes of their symptoms. By listening to their story, you will gain insights that advance your own journey toward knowledge that becomes healing.
Hello, and welcome to the Story Behind the Symptoms podcast. I am your host, Dr. David Clark, and on this podcast, we talk to people about their neuroplastic symptoms and how they recovered and where those symptoms might have originated. My guest today is Alison, and would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Do you want the long version or the short version? Probably the short.
Start with the short, and then we'll get into your symptoms.
Okay. All right, Alison. I live in Washington State. I'm approaching my 70th birthday coming up soon. I've been an active go-getter all my life. I like to dance and camp and hike. Been married to my husband for a little over 40 years. We did a Brady Bunch thing in 1985. So together we've got 5 grown children and 8 grandchildren. I've had several careers, including working with incarcerated youth for about 7 years. And currently, I am a semi-retired dance and performing arts instructor. I still teach an adult group that I've been with for decades, and we're still preparing for recitals. It's one of the things we do. I'm also coaching people with challenges related to neuroplastic symptoms, with an emphasis on the power of music and dance and how principles of Christianity harmonize with the principles of brain rewiring. So that's basically me in a nutshell. How is that?
That's terrific.
Okay.
I love people who have varied backgrounds. Makes for interesting discussion, and we'll get into some of those things. But let's start with your symptoms and when and where they began and what their progress has been over time.
Okay. All right. I'll do a quick overview, and then we'll figure out where to aim the deep dive. How's that? The big stuff happened in the fall of 2015. I started a downward spiral with anxiety and insomnia, panic attacks, and a bunch of unexplained symptoms. I had what we'll call a breakdown that was precipitated by an event that took place 10 years ago tomorrow. So interesting correlation of the time here. That was followed by about 6 months of not functioning very well. Lots of things going on. One of the things that happened was I didn't yawn. Saw a ton of doctors who either didn't help me or made things worse. I finally got a PTSD diagnosis, and that was combined over a period of years with about 50 to 60 unexplained symptoms. So I crawled
50
back.
or 60?
50 or 60. Yeah, I put them on a list. There was a lot. There was a lot of things going on.
That is a lot. I mean, my personal record patient had 27, and I thought that was
probably some of mine could be lumped together, right? But when I went back in retrospect and tried to list them all, that's how many I found, which is scary on one hand, but on the other hand, it's remarkable how they're gone and how much I've left behind me and don't even think about it most of the time anymore. So I crawled back into functionality, leaning on my faith, and I had a real determination to figure out what was wrong and do what I could about it. I launched this new career during that time, and it helped to have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. But even though I became pretty functional, I was still really miserable. And the fear and the symptoms were so bad that for several years, every day, I thought about how I just wasn't sure I wanted to live anymore. It was a very dark time in my life. In 2018, I discovered a health issue that I thought was all to blame for everything that was wrong. But after that was addressed, the fear and the symptoms were mostly still there. I ended up on tranquilizers to get through the worst of it. I experienced terror a lot of the time. That's a big word, but that's what I went through. So took those tranquilizers for about 1.5 years. They stopped working. I was able to get off of them, but I was just still in a world of hurt. Finally, in the spring of 2020, I learned about the whole world of mind-body conditions and nervous system dysregulation and brain rewiring, and I finally understood what had happened to me, and everything changed. I've been so pumped about this all morning, and just saying that makes me feel emotional because it's just such a wow to look back and remember how that was such a turning point. Success stories gave me a lot of hope. It was just an answer to my prayers. I bought a program. I began the process of brain retraining, and I got a lot better, but I started this roller coaster ride where new things came up and old things happened and other issues came along and derailed me. And it just inspired me to be a student of all things neuroplastic. So thank you for what you do and all the things that you have contributed to my gain of knowledge in this process. So through those years, I just gradually reached the point where I can say I'm doing really well. Life is good. I would say 95% of my symptoms are either gone or they're negligible. I sleep well almost all the time. If I have any kind of a hiccup or a trigger, I navigate it well with confidence because I know it will pass, and it does. I have good energy and ambition, especially for my age, I think. And I just don't feel like I am only recovered, that I just feel like I'm so much better than I was before. I just appreciate life, and I feel joy regularly, and I'm just looking for ways to spread the word and share hope with people. So thank you for the opportunity.
That's a remarkable journey. Why don't we start with the positive end of this story and talk about whether there were any particular ideas that you learned from the neuroplastic world that were the most helpful for you?
Yes. Well, one of the things I learned was that I had been doing several things right. Prayer, meditation, affirmations. I was using music. I was walking and stretching. I've been a singer-performer all my life, so I knew about deep breathing. That helped. Spent time outside. I did creative writing, gratitude journal. My husband read to me. That was great. And I ate really well, although I was limited at the time because of food reactions. But I also found out through brain retraining information that I was doing some things really wrong. And one of those things was keeping a spreadsheet where I tallied all my symptoms and everything that I took and everything that I did. And I just tracked it so obsessively. And I realize now that was not the right thing to do. So what I learned from brain retraining, I think, was just the education, the realization that I wasn't broken, this wasn't my fault, that there was hope, that I had the empowerment to do things to fix it. That was 80% of the battle, I think, because I felt so helpless and not knowing what was wrong. And that was I the only person this had ever happened to? Like, am I stuck like this the rest of my life? That hope was huge. I learned to not be afraid of things and avoid things because that had been making things worse. I developed electromagnetic hypersensitivity. I used to run to the other end of the house when I put the microwave oven on, right? I amped up the way that I expressed gratitude. I share that daily with friends and posts that we share back and forth. And the more I did that, the more I saw that I had things to be grateful for. And that just was life-changing. I changed my prayers to, instead of being a mindset of, woe is me, why aren't you fixing this? Help, help, I'm drowning. Gratitude in advance for the healing that I knew was coming. And that was a huge change. And that mindset was reflected in just how I lived my life and in all aspects of relationships and daily choices. The biggest thing was learning how to feel and visualize joy. Sometimes that was joy of past experiences and reliving them in detail in my mind verbally and feeling that joy again, and then taking that joy into the future and visualizing things that I wanted to happen to be able to do, whether large or small. And I just had miraculous experiences of those things materializing in my life. but it got to the point where it wasn't important if they materialized or not, because I learned how to summon joy. Like, I could do all the things, go to a place where I could weep with joy, whether the thing was happening or going to happen or not. And that was, as we know now, that flooded me with the chemicals that were needed to
Yes.
rewire and counteract all the adrenaline and cortisol that had been coursing through me for all those years. So
Yeah, it's so important to have a regular time for your own joy, and so many of my patients never have that. They are so busy taking care of everybody else in their world that they fail to put themselves on the list of people they take care of. And having regular joy in your life, at least in my practice, has been essential. It is an essential human skill, and learning how to do that, and even coming to the place of believing that you deserve that on a regular basis is huge for people. Let's talk for a moment about your Christian faith. We have not had a large number of Christians on this podcast, and in my practice, the person's Christian faith, when it is present, has kind of been a spectrum. In some of my patients, it has, in the positive end of the spectrum, has absolutely saved their lives to know that there is a higher power that cares about them and believes in them and is supportive of them. And at the other end of the spectrum, there are patients of mine who grew up with watchful and vengeful gods that were constantly reminding them that they were sinners and that they were not measuring up. And this became a huge burden on their self-esteem and created all kinds of challenging personality traits and difficulties and lack of taking joy in your life and choosing problematic personal relationships. And maybe you can explain where you were on that spectrum and how it played out for you.
thank you for asking that question, because I don't want it to be something that I feel like I have to push in people's faces, because I do know that people have baggage about it, right? But it's an honest part of my story, and it's one that I don't have any notes on preparing for, but let's see how I do off the top of my head here. I do want to acknowledge a couple of things. Yes, because of people's backgrounds, or maybe the folks that they associated with or their parenting, the religious experience relating to their trauma can definitely magnify the negative parts of what has happened to them. And I see how it can turn into the religious scrupulosity, which is a term I recently used, that can get people in a lot of trouble because it doesn't fix anything, right? It just causes more problems.
And it can lead to people, giving of themselves, to others, which is certainly a value in Christian faith and most other religions. But it can, like any good thing, be taken too far.
Exactly. I do believe that service to others is very healing and an important element of society. That's part of what, keeps our God Bless America great, right? But it can be taken too far. I never felt in my upbringing with my parents or my religious experiences, I never felt like God had a big stick and was waiting for me to step out of line. But I do know lots of people that had that experience, and I have a great deal of compassion on them. And it's especially tragic because whether that was your experience or not, no matter where you landed on that spectrum that you just spoke about, sometimes nervous system dysregulation, I think, has an extra layer of painfulness or difficulty for people who have felt like they've been good Christians all their lives, because you feel like, well, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. I'm praying. I'm trying to stay close to God. I'm going to church. I'm reading my scriptures. And why am I not better? And it's easy to jump to the conclusion of either God isn't there, or he must not love me, or I'm not worthy of this. And that adds another layer of difficulty to the whole recovery process. And I have so much compassion on that. I just want to hug everybody that has gone through that, because I felt it. I had a couple of years of feeling like the heavens were closed. Like, God, where are you? one of my favorite affirmations was, I have faith in God and he has faith in me. And I just reached this point of, he wouldn't have preserved me this far without having an end goal in sight, right? I'm still here. There must be a purpose. I've had experiences in my life, in my past. I can remember feeling the truth of God's existence and his love for me. And I'm not going to dismiss that because I'm sick. And so I just really focused on that affirmation and other thoughts and beliefs that came from repeating that. I ended up writing 40 poems about it. As a matter of fact, it was part of my healing process. Didn't want to get emotional today, but you asked the questions. Anyway, I'm very grateful that finally my faith in him and his faith in me allowed me to break through that wall and realize that he'd been there all along. And the more I studied about brain retraining, the more I thought, oh my gosh, I've been learning this all my life. And I can't read scriptures now without going, oh, gratitude. Oh, forgiveness. Oh, self-care. Oh, and there's all these principles. It's all there. And I knew it. I had the power all along, but I just didn't make the connection of how to put it to use.
I appreciate your sharing that. It's very important for my patients who are Christians to include this in their thinking when they are trying to recover from neuroplastic symptoms. And it's something that I had to learn. I'm not a Christian myself, although I am married to somebody who goes to church every Sunday, and we've been married for almost 50 years. So that is part of my life in that sense. And I have learned from my Christian patients a great deal about how their relationship with a higher power plays into their recovery, as well as in a few cases to their illness. Well, I'd like to get into the chronology a little bit. You indicated that your symptoms began in 2015, so that would have been in your late 50s. Did you ever have any of these kinds of symptoms at an earlier age?
Oh my gosh, yes. Preparing for this was a good way to analyze that. And I realized that there had actually been like 6 different layers of neuroplastic symptoms that had happened to me. So the first time something like this happened was, I was like 41, I think, and my vocal cords became paralyzed. At the time, it was labeled as caused by stress, and there certainly had been a lot of stress at that time in my life. I lost my ability to sing, and I'd been a singer all my life, so that felt like just such a punch in the gut. But I still also couldn't hardly talk. Had months of voice therapy to get that back. And then things got better, but I also started dealing with depression and anxiety, right? And so trying to navigate all of that at the same time was very interesting. So I had a steroid shot for a frozen shoulder about 16, 17 years ago, and I reacted really badly to that shot. I was very angry and very anxious for several months. And life was very stressful at that moment. I was running a performing arts studio, working like 80 hours a week. And so all of those things together and past traumas, yeah.
Yeah, no, its frozen shoulder is quite commonly has a significant contribution from a neuroplastic process.
I had no idea at the time. I'm like, what did I do to cause this? And yeah. Okay, so the third time I can look back and say that a neuroplastic symptom entered my life was I developed a fear of falling asleep, which was really, really tough when you're sleep deprived. And yeah, and it's interesting how this happened. I had 3 lithotripsies in 2 years, 2 of them 6 days apart. If people don't know, that's the procedure you get when you have kidney stones. And the first time, the anesthesiologist was great. They gave me a drug to calm me down, put me in happy land. I was just, woohoo, this is wonderful, thank you. And put me on a gurney, took me into the OR. Everybody talked to me, introduced themselves, asked my permission. We're going to put you out now. Is that okay? It was an awesome experience. 6 days later, it was not. Different place, different doctor, different procedure. I was giving nothing to calm me down. I walked into the OR in my own power. They put me on the table. Hardly anybody talked to me, and they didn't tell me they were going to put me under. And when I went under, I had this feeling of, wait, I'm not ready. I'm losing control. Stop. And so when I came home from that, every time I'd start to fall asleep, my brain would wake me up to say, wait, you need to stay conscious, be in control. So that kind of got better over a few weeks, but boy, it came back with a vengeance later. So that was kind of the second time a medical trauma.
Yeah, yeah, understandable. And you mentioned that you went through a trauma 10 years ago tomorrow that played a role in probably exacerbating your symptoms, if I'm understanding that correctly. Is
Yes,
that
yes.
something you're able to share with us today?
I can. I also wanted to share that I developed interstitial cystitis in there after we figured out that it was a rogue parathyroid gland that had been dumping calcium into my body and causing the stones. I found out that my endocrinologist had missed that and had been prescribing extra calcium all those years. So there was another layer of medical trauma. So in the fall of 2015-16, I stopped taking Benadryl to help me sleep because I've been taking it for years, and I saw stuff about side effects and thought, I don't want those side effects. Didn't realize at the time that I was precipitating problems, and I started having these panic attacks and insomnia and different symptoms. So in March of 2016, I started having really difficulty breathing. And it reminded me of bronchitis that I'd recently had, but I didn't have any other viral symptoms, so I wasn't quite sure what to think of that. So I went to an emergency room, well, a walk-in clinic, I guess. And the doctor, well-intentioned, bless her, she tried. She just thought I was having an asthma attack, and she prescribed some steroids and an inhaler. And that was the wrong thing to do for me at that moment in time. She had no way of knowing. So within a few days, I knew I was in big trouble. I had all the symptoms just went off the charts. The terror went off the charts. I stopped taking them, realizing they were making things worse and not helping me. But that was the beginning of the 6 months of hell. So yeah, I had about 4 weeks where I lost almost 15 pounds from panic-based diarrhea every night and not functioning very well.
And was there anything in that period of time, late 2015, early 2016, that changed in your life that would have been stressful, that could have triggered all this?
Oh yeah. I'm sure a lot of it was the collective traumas that, straw that broke the camel's back moment. But I had two dear friends die just a couple months from each other in January and in March. I was working, teaching dance at a bunch of classes. I was preparing for recital. I was choreographing 2 musicals back to back. My dear friend from childhood who passed away that week before Easter, we made plans to go to her funeral. So Saturday, I go to the walk-in clinic, I get that medication. Sunday, I'm in charge of the musical Easter program at church. I'm leading the choir. I put together all the numbers. And then we leave church and get in the car and drive to Montana in the snowstorms while I'm taking this drug that's turning me into somebody I'm not, right? And feeling like I hadn't been there for my friend while the last few years of her life, while she was failing with MS and stuff, and guilt with that. So yeah, there was stuff going on.
A lot of stuff going on. Okay. Well, that would be more than enough to trigger symptoms in most people, for sure. Regular viewers of this podcast will know that I always ask people about their childhood experience. Many of my patients went through, let's just say, significant traumas, and other people, it was not so obvious what the pressures were or where they were coming from. Very often in people who have multiple symptoms or long-lasting symptoms, varied symptoms that we can trace to some level of pressure that they experienced when they were young.
There definitely was some childhood trauma and adult trauma as well, but I'll go back here. And I'm one of those regular listeners, so I knew you'd ask that question, and I more and more believe how it's valid. I see it in clients and friends. It's a big deal. So the first thing was in first grade. There was a teenage neighbor boy who had started molesting me. It wasn't intense. It wasn't horrible. The molestation really wasn't incredibly traumatic. But when my parents found out, that was traumatic. They were scared. It was the 60s. They didn't know how to handle it. My father, who was a kind, wonderful, amazing human being who I could hardly ever find fault with, scared the heck out of him, and his way of dealing with it was to beat me with a belt, which left welts, right?
Beat you with a belt.
Yeah, because it scared them. They didn't know what else to do. Nobody had ever told me not to let somebody do this to me, right? And then we moved, and we never talked about it. So bless them, it was the 60s. You know, nobody knew how to talk about those things then, but that was the first traumatic thing from my childhood. Then in the second grade, my mother had a breakdown. She had a ton of emotional, mental problems in her life. The first one she'd had before she'd married, first breakdown, and never really got any help for it. So this one was big. She was in a psychiatric ward and was gone for months. She had shock treatments that changed her, kind of like flew over the cuckoo's nest sort of a thing. But while she was gone, I had a nanny, although in those days we called her a maid, Ethel. And she took care of us, my brother and I, for like 3 months. And she was wonderful. Like, this is some of my best childhood memories because my mother had been unstable, right? A loving mom, but with lots of problems. And so my mom came home from the hospital for my birthday, like my 7th or 8th birthday, I'm not sure. And she didn't know who I was. They let her come home and then she went back. I don't know that I was that bothered from it, though, because I felt so good about Ethel taking care of me, but it was hard when Ethel left and Mom came home. So let's see. About that time, I was taking care of my girlfriend's cat, the same girlfriend I went to her funeral in Montana, taking care of her cat, and the cat was poisoned while I was taking care of it, and I found this little dead body. That was really a traumatic thing. Okay, here's the big thing. When I was 13, I ended up staying home all summer to take care of my mother because she was going through drug withdrawal. She had gone to a Mexican doctor who had this miracle cure for arthritis, which we know now was a scam, but she was desperate. Found out when we moved to the Washington area that she'd been taking heavy doses of steroids that she needed to get off of. And so while she went through that drug withdrawal, I was the person staying home taking care of her because my dad worked long hours during the summer. She had a really hard time. And there was one day where she just screamed and passed out. And we didn't have 911 in those days. Luckily, the neighbor was a nurse. I went through the fence and got her, and she came back and helped. We got through it, but I had an eyewitness to what medications poorly managed did to a person because my mom was never the same after that. That was a lot for a 13-year-old girl to go through. There's a little bit more, but those are the biggies there.
Though, yeah, every single one of those would have a large impact on a child. The patient experience that I've had is that sexual abuse at any level sends a powerful message to a child. The more young the child is, the more powerful the message that you are not valuable for who you are as a person. You are only valuable because you are providing this gratification to somebody else. And it's a devastating message for a child. And then when you are beaten because of it, it multiplies that message that this is your fault and that you are to blame and that there is something deeply wrong with you, that you have allowed this to happen. And, you know, even something as simple as the cat dying under your care, that's once again a serious flaw on your part, that, you know, a child that age is going to take the personal responsibility for that. And even for your mother's hospitalization and her erratic behavior, a young child who is experiencing that is going to be thinking all the time about what can I do to ensure that mom's behavior will not be erratic? What can I do to help mom when she comes back? What did I do that resulted in my mother being hospitalized like that? And, you know, suffering this terrible trauma of experiencing electroshock, that, you know, maybe she wouldn't have had to go through that if I had just been a better daughter. I mean, this is the mindset of a typical 7-year-old. And then once again, age 13, you're given this responsibility that no 13-year-old should be asked to provide. And once again, you can look at it as a personal failure that your mom had this seizure. And, maybe we don't, maybe today we can see that is not logical, that it wasn't obviously your fault what was going on. But a 13-year-old is going to feel like, oh, I messed up again, especially when you've been set up for years to believe that you're not good enough. And, what does a child do in response to that? They are going to try to be perfect. They are going to do everything they possibly can to make things better in that household, to try to prove their own worth as a human being. And the level of effort that they're going to put out on behalf of other people is going to put them on a treadmill that they find it very challenging to step off. And so you get, working 80 hours a week in your professional world, making massive spreadsheets about your symptoms to cover every detail. And nobody can keep up that pace indefinitely. And when you have an internal drive, and this doesn't have to be from, major traumas like you went through. It can be, much more subtle, what we call lowercase t traumas, sources of pressure that make people as children feel like they're not measuring up or they're not good enough. But what you went through would be guaranteed to give somebody that internal drive that they must prove themselves. They have to perform. When your conscious mind can't turn that off, can't say, okay, I've done enough. I'm going to stop with the 80 hours a week and the massive spreadsheets and the care and concern for everybody else in the world. I'm going to put myself on the list of people I take care of for a little while here. If you can't consciously do that because you've been set up to do the exact opposite from the first grade onwards, then your brain is going to be your only hope, that it is going to try to communicate to you in whatever way that it can, that it wants you to take a break, that it wants you to slow down, that it thinks you have shown heroic perseverance to come through everything that you've had to come through. And it will send this message to you in the form of physical symptoms, trying to force you to stop. And in your case, 60 or 70 symptoms. I mean, it was really hammering on you. And yet you were able to fight through that with an extraordinary drive that, at least in my patients, that level of drive gets its origin from very, very difficult experiences that people had when they were kids. And it's, when you don't have a parallel life to compare and you look back, it's a challenge to appreciate how much you went through, just how difficult those things were.
Yeah.
And, again, regular watchers of this podcast will know that I often ask people to imagine one of their own kids going through those same experiences. Because when you imagine a child of your own experiencing that, then it becomes more real somehow. You can appreciate more accurately just how it must have been for you.
Yeah.
When you think of one of your own kids having to deal with all that.
I don't want it to seem, though, like my parents are getting thrown under the bus, because they really were pretty good parents. My mother had so many mental and emotional problems to deal with. All things considered, she did okay. My dad was fabulous. He was a wonderful human being and my hero. That was his one big mess up, right?
We don't bash parents on this podcast, because they typically they do the best they can.
with what they're going and myself as a parent, right? I can give myself a break because I've had a lot of stuff to deal with too. But all things considered, I think I need to acknowledge that my brother had a lot of problems and he got a lot of their attention, and I was the good girl left to my own resources mostly, right? I got attention by performing. I got attention by getting good grades and being the good girl, while my poor brother, he had ADHD before anybody knew what that was about, right? And then he died young from alcoholism. He was 41. And my dad died young. He was 51. And all those deaths and watching my mother shift all her dependency to me after, when my dad died and everything, that had an effect on me as well. I was the family caregiver. So yeah, it was a lot. And it's quite remarkable that I've come through it as well as I have. I'm grateful I found the answer to what was wrong. No wonder my brain did what it did to me, right?
That's right.
So grateful. I tell you how I found out about it. I was on a Facebook group for people with electromagnetic hypersensitivity, and somebody mentioned brain rewiring, and I'm just like, what is this? And as soon as I looked into it, it was like the light of heaven shone on me. That's what's wrong with me. Thank you, God. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's electromagnetic sensitivity. I wish that whole community would find out about this approach. There are so many people there looking for answers, and multiple chemical sensitivity as well, and food sensitivities, and mast cell activation syndrome, and on and on.
All those things
that respond very well to this approach. One last area that I should ask about briefly is that many people who have overcome the tremendous childhood challenges that you did, they are so accustomed to being the support person for everybody else that at least in their early close personal relationships, they don't always make the best choices. They often will choose people to be in relationships with that have a lot of problems or a lot of needs or require a great deal of support. And the early relationships in people who come from this background, the background that you did, are often unbalanced, where my patients are giving a lot more than they are getting back. And on the other hand, there are a few people who have been able to avoid that difficulty. Does any of that sound like you? Is this your first husband that you've been married to for 40 years, or?
No, it's my second husband. Yeah. The first marriage, I was young, and there was things about it that were very good, mainly 3 wonderful children. But yeah, I didn't base my choice of saying yes to that proposal on the same criteria that I used the second time around. Let's put it that way. Yeah, it's interesting because I've been on stage all my life, and it was such a part of my identity. And my first husband didn't like that part of me. To him, I was embarrassing myself, and he didn't like that. And he's basically a good guy, and he's doing better with his life, and we have 3 great children from that. But definitely, the first time around, the choice was affected by my trauma history. I'm sure I was kind of looking for somebody to take care of. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not easy to grow out of that, and it sounds like you definitely did, and that over the course of the decades, you've overcome a tremendous amount, including 60 or 70 symptoms. It's really an extraordinary tribute to your perseverance in finding a way forward in spite of a tremendous amount of adversity.
You're very kind to say so. I appreciate that. It's hard to know how to talk about it. Like, I appreciate you so much giving people this format, and I love watching your interviews. And everybody probably does the same dance. Okay, if if I go into too great of detail, it's going to trigger people or it's going to trigger me or whatever. But if I talk about it like everything's fine, la, 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 then it's almost like you're not credible. Like, I can't believe that happened to her. She's just fine. What's the catch here? And so I really, really was in a bad place. I really, really was. I promise. I didn't take pictures or videos at that time because I didn't want to remember it. I'm a different person now, and I'm grateful. And to the point where I'm grateful it happened to me, even though I was in hell. I am grateful for what I've learned because I can help other people, have more compassion than I ever had before on myself and on others. And I've learned so much. It was worth it. You couldn't have convinced me that at the time, but now it totally was.
Yeah, an analogy that I often make, both for adverse childhood experience and for landing in the middle of these physical symptoms, is to imagine people parachuting into a dangerous jungle or into the Himalayan mountains through no fault of their own. They find themselves in this horrendously challenging environment, and they didn't do anything to deserve it. They're just there in the middle of it, and they deserve tremendous credit for having found their way out.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. I like that. The validation is so helpful for anybody struggling with this stuff because it can be a nightmare.
Yeah. And another analogy is that my patients often remind me of Olympic weightlifters who've been asked to carry 50 pounds more than the world record for their weight class with respect to stress. And that they're actually very strong people. They've just been asked to carry a huge load that would bring any human being to their knees, and that the ability to learn how to put that weight down and then find out, they're actually have been very strong people all along once they put that weight down, which you have clearly done more than once.
Thank you. That really touched my heart that you said that. I really appreciate that. It was very meaningful. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing so many details. I think it's going to be tremendously heartening for anybody who sees this and who is currently struggling. Are there any other questions that you have for me or anything else that you would like to share with our viewers?
Oh, questions. I didn't have a question ready. I have a thank you. All hail Dr. Clark. I mean, I just love so much what you're doing. I also want to make it clear that even though so much of my trauma was medical trauma, I've had really good experiences with some really good doctors. Everybody's doing the best they can with the education that they got. I just appreciate so much the enlightenment that you're trying to share. And I just want to help in that process because there are so many people suffering who don't need to be suffering. They just need to have somebody turn on the light for them, right? And give them the hope that's there. So thank you.
Well, and it goes for physicians as well. Any physician who's watching this and listening to you at the beginning about your 60 or 70 symptoms would be just shaking their head because people like you are a nightmare for most physicians. They hear everything and they don't know where to begin with a diagnostic evaluation. And they know that at the end of that evaluation, they're not going to find anything significant. And they're not going to know what to do because it hasn't been part of their training. Whereas for me, anybody who's got as many symptoms as you've had, there's only one condition that can possibly be responsible for all that. And that's a neuroplastic condition. And so I'm going to immediately launch into a diagnostic evaluation for that, which is asking you about, well, what kinds of stresses are you coping with right now? And what kinds of stresses did you have when you were a kid? And it's all going to come out, and we're going to be able to have a very positive therapeutic approach for you that's going to be effective. And it has changed what was my practice 40 years ago from, a great deal of frustration and for many people in the medical profession, burnout from the 40% of primary care patients that have this condition. And it completely flips that. And people with this become very rewarding to work with because they are so determined to get better. And you're a shining example of that. And they have success. And it's so rewarding as a medical professional to see that happen.
Thank you. I'm a walk and talk miracle, and I'm glad to join the ranks. And let's go. Let's go.
Okay. that's what I'm hoping, is that within 5 or 10 years that this will become routine. That may be a little optimistic on my part, but once doctors see this, they can't unsee it. And one family doctor took me aside at a conference and said these ideas had put the joy back into her work. And that's what I want for everybody in my profession, because it's going to bring joy to their patients too.
Yes, yes. By the way, my MD now, she gets it.
Wonderful.
She gets it. I adore her.
Patients training doctors is a great way to go. And we encourage all of our successful patients to go back to their doctors and show them, remember me? I was your nightmare. Now I'm okay.
I've thought about that, looking up some of those doctors and watch this, learn the story. Here's what happens after I saw you, right? I might be doing that this week, actually. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And
thank you, Dr. Clark.
Best wishes for continued success in your practice.
Thank you. Thank you. Bless you. Bless you. Appreciate it.